is specifically about AR 2024-167, but more so, it's a broad introduction to new members on street naming and renaming and all the processes. And we have our staff here who is in this little amazing office that does magical things. And so magic is the theme of today, with Grimald Place being on it. So we'll do introductions first, which that's a Harry Potter reference if you don't know. Ms. Braga.
Karen Braga.
Anna Brawley.
Zach Johnson.
Exile.
Christopher Constant on the phone. Mr. Rivera. Present. Mr. Salt. Are you there, Mr. Salt? Okay, if you do tune in, unmute, say hi, and then we have
Carlene Wilson with addressing.
Great. And so we try to turn the mic off when we're not talking so members can hear. Carlene Wilson, thank you. So Carlene had asked for an opportunity to brief us on the naming process because we have an item coming forward that's a very interesting and unusual item relating to street naming. So before we get into the specific item 2024-167, I think we should go through the code. So Carlene, have at it.
I did it right that time. So there's multiple different reasons to do street names. A lot of them are duplicate street names. Maybe you've got a new subdivision that's coming in and we need to figure out what the street names are going to be with and related to those. But there is a public process on it for existing right-of-ways. And so to follow that, we include all of the affected property owners and we send them notification. And I did include just the samples on what we did for this one in particular. But for a duplicate street name is very similar to this unnamed alley, but we send a letter to the property owners that are going to be directly affected by this, either naming or renaming of a street. And although codes is very black and white and says to notify them of a new street name, we actually broaden that a lot. So there's participation. And so what we do is we actually give those property owners like 3 weeks to submit new street name suggestions. So they actually get to be part of the process. Once we get those new name suggestions, we go through and verify that we can use them, whether, make sure they're not a duplicate or they don't sound too similar to an existing street. And then from there, we actually send another letter out saying, hey, these are the ones that we've approved. Why don't you vote on your favorite street name? Whichever one gets the most votes is the one that wins. If we end up with a tie, we typically do a coin toss. And then once we determine what the new street name is, then we fill out the executive order documents, send them downtown for approval, and then we get to the process to where the clerk's office sends notification to those property owners that so-and-so street name's been signed and approved by the mayor, and they have 30 days to appeal the name. Any questions? I know it's kind of a quick rundown, but it's not too complicated. So for this,
We'll put one thing out there. It's the thing that I always found very interesting about this process is, but for the appeal, the assembly has no role, right? Other than we could propose a name change. And this is, I believe, one of those rare circumstances where the mayor has almost plenary power once the process has come to them, the way we have structured it as is. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm not sure.
Meaning the mayor gets to decide. There's no assembly process except for the appeal unless we initiate.
Sorry, correct. But we always send a suggestion. So it usually comes from addressing. We encourage an approval of said new street name because there's for us. Yes. So our request and suggestion is on that. But then if the property owners do not like it or they don't want to, for whatever reason it is, they do have the option to appeal, which is where they get to do their public testimony with the assembly. Okay. Any other questions on that one? Okay. So then with this one in particular, unless I need to go in more detail, but this one in particular was brought to our attention. Actually, I think we may have found this on our own while we were doing some new address assignments. So there is an alley in between Lois Drive and Doris Street. The properties that are on Doris Street on the east side of Doris Street all have Doris Street addresses. Unfortunately, not a single one of those properties has a driveway, a walkway, or even any kind of access to Doris Street. Every single one of them actually access off the alley, which does not have a name. So part of the process for addressing is to assign proper addresses. And you're supposed to assign the address off of the street that they're closest access to. Unfortunately, with this one, it doesn't have a name, so we can't just change them to so many numbers on unnamed road. So to fix that problem is where we pull in the street naming process. So this one we went through, determined the affected properties, which is basically all of them that have houses in there. So we notified them that we needed to name the alley so they could have proper addresses for emergency response and other reasons. And so we sent out the letters, asked for name suggestions, and then 3 names were suggested. And so then the next letter we sent out was a voting letter. And at that point, we received 5 votes from the 9 properties that were sent notification. There was 1 for Effie, 2 for Levon, and 2 for Grimald. So because we ended up with a tie, it wasn't me, it was my coworker who was doing the street name change, but he went to a different department, had them do a coin toss with heads and tails to determine which one we were going to call the winner due to the tie. Grimald Place is the one that won the coin toss. So we then sent letters to all the property owners letting them know that Grimald Place is the name that won the coin toss and that we had sent an executive order down for approval so we could get that process going and get new addresses assigned to those homes. We then got contacted that one of the property owners didn't like the name and wanted to appeal it. So I went through the process with them on how they can do that. So they went and got signatures from a handful of the property owners and submitted their appeal to the clerk's office. And so that's where that part came up to. I know I can say that 2 of the property owners that signed the petition to appeal it did not even vote in the street name voting process. I know for addressing, we always take those kinds of notes into consideration, especially even if we're sending notice out on our letters. We state that if we receive no comments, we're going to assume you are not objecting to anything. So other than that, there's nothing wrong with the name. We actually think it's very unique and very nice to have a nice, unique name, especially when a lot of them try to reuse very Alaskan words in street names around town. So I think that's kind of the basis of where we are now. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone kind of had a general idea on why the name is coming to you, why we were naming it, and that there was nothing wrong with any of the names suggested. It's just how it played out in the end.
A question from Ms. Brawley.
Yeah. First, thanks for the explanation. Second, I just want to note, I know this is in my district and it just happens to be north of what I think is the best name in the city, which is Out of Place. But this one is also very good too. I do have a question actually about my own street name, but I will ask you off the record after the meeting. And but my question is, so for those folks whose name, the street name is being changed, presumably they have existing addresses, like you said, on Doris. So going forward, will they still be able to basically receive mail from either address? Obviously, it's probably best practice to change to the new address, but what happens with the old ones?
Till it's green.
How to-
There you go.
Double tap it. So what happens is once we officially have a new name, from there, we give notice to them that it's official. But then we also allow for at least 30 days for folks to prepare for their address change. That also helps the sign shop, get a work order in so they can get the new signs made. And then what we do is we actually have a good deal with the postal service around here, which is really nice. I've got a direct contact and relationship with the gal named Bonnie, she's the address management for USPS that's in Anchorage for the whole state. And so what they do is they add the new address to the system and they link it to the old address. And so for at least a period of a year, they can get mail at both of them. So it gives them lots of time to get everything moved and changed over. And so there's no big rush to have to change it. But eventually at that year time frame, they will unlink them. And then the old address will go away.
And then another follow-up, well, also, I actually lived in a house in Ohio that had 2 addresses. It was, you could mail it to either one, but that was a permanent thing. My other question is, and I'll also preface by saying, I think it's a missed opportunity that this city does not have a Lois Lane and that it's Lois Street. But my question is kind of on suffixes. How are those chosen? Is there a logic to them? Because I see this was place, I know folks use lane. There's all kinds of different ones. So is there a strict kind of rule around that?
There is. So our municipal code actually defines street types throughout the municipality. So any street that is going east and west that's over 1,000 feet, that's called an avenue. Avenue. If you got a street that goes north and south over 1,000 feet, it's called a street. Curvy linear streets are called drives or roads. And then if you've got a street less than 1,000 feet that says is east and west, it's called a court. If it's less than 1,000 feet and goes north and south, it's called a place. And then you've got lanes and ways, and I always forget which one is which, but it goes at an angle and there are certain lengths. So yes, they're all defined. Existing street names didn't always fall under, even though the rules were there, but but anyways, no, from at least since I started here in the early 2000s, we've stuck with it's in code, it's defined, let's keep it that way. So that's how those ones come through.
May I ask one more question? I'm curious also, I know there's cul-de-sacs and circles, and I know people talk about them in slightly different ways. So is there a difference between something called XYZ circle versus XYZ court? Or are those kind of synonymous?
So a circle is a street that ends in a cul-de-sac. So a court is just a short street that's got a beginning and an end at like an intersection with another street.
If you go to this section of the code and read through all of it's very interesting. Like ways have to be circuitous and like there's a whole thing. Okay, Mr. Johnson or Zach, and then Ms. Braga.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry if I missed this already. What happens hypothetically if the assembly takes this resolution up and it does not pass?
So if it's not ratified, I believe that's the correct term, then we start the process all over again.
And the opposite is true. If we pass it, then we just don't agree with the protest and we let it be. So, yeah. Ms. Karen.
So this is the protest with the signatures here. And petition of name change to Grummold Place. But what are the crossouts? Originally, did they put it in, they wanted it changed from Grummold to Levon, and why are those things crossed out on there?
So there was confusion on how to go about it. Once they turned in the petition, and then once I saw it, I explained that they couldn't appeal the name Grummold and suggest a new name. So instead of submitting a whole new petition, the clerk's office said, I think they just called it technical error, and they were able to cross that stuff out. Because what they wanted to do is the name that they wanted, that they had voted for, a couple of them, was the Levon. So they wanted to appeal the name Grummold and change it to Levon, which they couldn't do because Grummold hadn't become official yet. So they had to cross that out so they could just turn that in and get their appeal going.
And if you read it as a whole, it's protest petition of name change to Grummold Place. That's what their final language is there. Even though the next one, we are appealing this name Grummold Place is also accurate. If you just have to read it with the markup. Yeah, and it's interesting. If a property owner owns multiple properties on a street, do they get multiple votes?
So the way our code is written and the way that we process these is it's one vote per property owner. So if you have 5 properties and each one of those properties has your name listed differently, say first name, middle name, last name, and then say first name and last name, or you've got yourself separate and then with a spouse, those could be counted as individual votes. But if it is exactly the same, it is considered just 1 vote per property owner. It's not listed as 1 vote for property.
Yeah, I just note that it's interesting. One of the petitioners it works for Spinell, and then one of them is Spinell. And
She
so-
does live there though.
Okay, it's her personal home.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so any other questions on this? Nope. So, yeah, there's kind of diverging opinions on whether or not it should go this way. It's very interesting. There is a proposal before us. If we choose yes to approve, then it's done. If not, the process goes back to the drawing board. That's it. Is it a public hearing item? It is a public hearing item. Okay, and it's on the agenda this week. Okay, it'll be before us in June. Okay, thank you. That's it. We'll be done then.